Hello and welcome everyone back to the H2P podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're back here. We hope everyone had a very happy new year. Spent some time with some loved ones, stayed safe, maybe ate some good food, drank some good drink. It was a good one for me. I was actually spending most of my New Year's Eve in Atlanta still. I flew in towards the evening, was able to spend some time with some family a little bit afterwards. But we're back in action. We're here in Pittsburgh. We made it home safe. But I want to talk about, again, the culture of Pitt football at the top of this show. Now, we'll get to Pitt basketball the second half because we are now at the time where Pitt football's done for the year. Of course, Pitt lost the Peach Bowl, but not in an embarrassing fashion that I would say. I think Pitt fans, you have every reason, and that's why I kind of made this the focal point of my game story. You have every reason to be excited about Pitt football, not just for what they did this year, but what they can do next year. I look at this roster and I see a lot of returning players, but I look at how this game was played. They lost 31-21, mainly because of that pick six that Davis Bevell threw in the end. But you saw guys out there scrapping with a top 10 team in the country, with a third-string quarterback, missing your top running back. Your best edge rusher gets hurt before the final drive of the game. Your best safety gets one of your starting safeties gets hurt before the final drive of the game, where they scored the touchdown that put Michigan State up in the fourth quarter. And to the very end, they were in that game until Bevell threw that pick six. I don't think that there's any minimizing it. It's not looking at any glass half full. It's a acknowledgement that's like, hey, you know what? That's an 11-win season where you won the ACC. And you had a lot of guys who learned a lot of lessons on that year who will be coming back next year. And I can tell you, if you were watching, I'm not sure if they showed it on TV, but you could see on the sidelines when Pitt gave up that final score, how angry that defense was. John Morgan especially out there. Just showing how frustrated he was for all the work that they put in. They shut down Michigan State's offense for basically 45 minutes of game time. That's ridiculous. That's something that doesn't happen just out of the blue. That defense has worked to improve, and it has improved throughout this season. And yeah, sure, it has some weak points. It has some places where it could be stronger. And they're going to need to replace John Patrician and Phil Campbell at linebacker, Keyshawn Camp at defensive line. But I think they showed you they've got the depth. And they believe in what that they're being taught there, and they believe in fight and go out there and fight into the last minute. And they believe in the we not me stuff that Pat Narduzzi has been saying. And I said this way back earlier in the season that I thought this culture was different this year with the way that the players responded to the challenges of Narduzzi, the challenge of Kenny Pickett, to the different things that you saw them rise up at different points of the season and say, hey, we're not going to let this happen again. That's how they got here. And could this season have been better? Yep, sure. Any season could have been better. Is this, if Pitt, is Pitt a team that could have gone into the college playoff and done damage? Probably not against Georgia and Alabama. I think they would have put up a great fight against a Michigan, against the Cincinnati. Heck, they might have even beaten those teams. Traded. That might have been like a coin flip of a game in either of those matchups. But I do think that this is the step that you needed to step out of mediocrity, to step out of being 7-5 or 8-6 or somewhere around that range every year. Because that's where Pitt has been. That Pitt had not had a 9-win season under Pat Narduzzi since he took over the program. And now that barrier is gone. And as much as, we always talk about how what it matters what's on the field, it matters it matters what's in between the lines. There are elements to that being part of your psyche, knowing that you can have that kind of success. It's different from saying it every week, and how Pitt ended all of their breakdowns, their huddles, when everyone puts their hand together at the end of a practice or at the end of a game, and they say, 1, 2, 3, and they say something like, let's go Pitt, or hail to Pitt, or something. They've been saying ACC champs. That's what they've been saying all season long. It's different when you say it and you think, and you go back to your dorm room or your off-campus housing, and you're thinking like, man, I hope we can do it. That'd be a great feeling to finally get that. It's different from saying it than being like, man, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be there, to get that. And then it's up to those captains, those leaders that will carry on into next year, to know what to remember, what got them there, what made them successful, and carry it over to the next group and teach it to the young guys who, even guys, I'll say like the new guys that are playing this year. You got some freshmen like Rodney Hammond, who was very impressive. Gavin Bartholomew, very impressive. Guys that are new to the program. Even Jordan Addison, who's a sophomore. You want guys like Haba. You want guys who have been around a bit. That offensive line, Jake Cradle, Gabe Hoy. Guys who've been with the program for quite some time. You want those guys to be able to say, hey, you know what, guys? We were here for a while. When Pitt football was the joke that everyone made fun of. Even when we were good, even when we would win 3 or 4 games in a row, people would still say, it doesn't matter, we're going to collapse. And if you want to be able to recreate what we did in this year, this is the challenge that we can put to those newcomers, to those new kids, to say we're not going to let the faults of our previous years impact these new teams. This is how you establish that culture, that environment. I know we're talking about basketball in the next segment, but one of the realest things that Jeff Capel ever talked about when I was talking to him and I was asking him about leadership and finding those guys, and this is back before all those guys transferred last year, but he was talking about how it's vital for any coach to have players who step up in those moments and accept the challenge and take on that leadership component. A coach can say and yell and put, go have all the approaches that they want to do, but if a player doesn't respond, if a player doesn't step up into that role, that's ultimately up to that player. It's not going to happen. That leader won't develop, and then you're not going to have a leader amongst the group. And then when things go bad in a situation, everyone's going to be looking around at each other like, okay, who's going to step up? I think Pitt found those guys this year. I think Kenny Pickett was the main one who was the start of it. But I think that you saw guys like Servassier Dennis. I think even Kalijah Cansey. Heck, you even got some young guys like Dayon Hayes, who I think is going to be a phenomenal edge rusher for this team in the next few years. Watch out for Dayon Hayes. I think he's going to be a beast. But it's that culture, that understanding. And we won't be able to tell until they take on West Virginia in the backyard brawl next year and they start their 2022 campaign. But it really seems to me that at least at this point, with the way that they fought in that game, it'd be different if they just laid down and died against Michigan State and it was a blowout like those college football playoff games. It'd be very different for me. But in a game that after they lost Nick Patty on the second drive, and they still found a way to build a lead, and they were fighting to the very end, and it took Michigan State making some great plays. And by the way, those were great plays by Michigan State. Peyton Thorne threw some really good passes. He threw more during the game, too, before the comeback that were just dropped. Connor Hayward made a great catch. That Jalen Reed kid made a great catch. They made several great catches. They played a heck of a game. There's no shame in that. But I think that's the point here, is that there have been plenty of losses that you could feel a lot of shame about as a Pitt fan. You're like, man, this looked like there was a lack of effort. This looked like this wasn't together. This looked like, no, this was a game where you saw like, man, these kids threw everything they had. And it was just a lot of unfortunate circumstances that worked against them, that were out of their control, that put them in a tight spot. But again, the loss isn't the bottom line of the Peach Bowl for me. Is that you're going to have guys, and I think also the bad taste in the mouth of the Peach Bowl, I think that might linger a little bit for some of those players that are returning next year. Now, some players won't. We know Shockey Jack Louis and has transferred. David Green has transferred. Two guys that ultimately we know Pitt with their recruiting, there was going to be a question of how do they get back down to 85 scholarships because that's where the NCAA is requiring them to be. So there's going to be some tough decisions moving forward. But Shockey Jack Louis went from being maybe at the top option for Pitt about a year ago to being really the fourth thought of the receiving group when everyone was healthy. And this is going to be a team with Jordan Addison, Jared Wayne, and Jalen Barden next year, and they really like that Jaden Bradley kid. So I kind of get it for Shockey Jack Louis. But again, for me, that Peach Bowl was about seeing how those guys came together and fought and supported each other. And even with Davis Bevel, who had a rough game, he threw that pick, and he was watching the other team run down the sideline. I immediately saw Gavin Bartholomew. I immediately saw Pitt players go to him and be like, "Hey man, you fought hard. Keep your head up." That's the kind of culture stuff that I think is good to see. Now it won't matter if next year they go out and they become the same old Pitt again. And they don't get to they don't win the Coastal, they don't move forward, they're not showing that they're showing like they're regressing, and some of that may depend on what happens at the quarterback situation with Keaton Slovis, and will Nick Patty compete for the spot? What will happen there with the offense, with the offensive line that's all coming back, take steps forward because they looked rough in that game. All of that still has to happen, but when and if it does, you got to remember that that's the upside that Pat Narduzzi has brought to Pitt football. He's not an X's and O's genius. He's not an X's and O's wizard. I think we've all kind of seen that over the years. But he is a guy that has gotten these kids to believe in what he's putting together, and that's something to celebrate right now. Pitt fans, you have every reason to be proud of your Panthers and how they've put together this season, and every reason to be excited to show up at Heinz Field next year when they're taking on West Virginia in the season opener. And man, that might be another chance at another special year for the Panthers. We'll talk more about them as the offseason rolls on, as we get more information as far as, other transfers out, other transfers in, and things that are going on here. But I want to take a quick break because we got to talk about Pitt basketball. We'll do that in just a second. Here on the H2P podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our show here, as always, on DKPittsburghSports.com. Remember to subscribe to all our podcasts at DK Pittsburgh Sports, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or anywhere podcasts are hosted. We're also on YouTube. Check us out there. But I want to talk about Pitt hoops for a bit here. And I want to lead with what I know about the Ithiel Horton situation. Now, if you remember, and I wrote an article about this while I was in Atlanta because it was going down literally the day of the game, and I'm sitting there like, well, this is a bit different of what I thought I'd be doing with my Thursday. But if you remember, Ithiel Horton, the team's leading the one of the leading scorer from last year who returned this year, meaning there are three guys, of course. Champagny went to the NBA, Xavier Johnson and Audis Tony transferred out. So all three of those guys were the top three scorers, but the fourth leading scorer that stuck with the team is Ithiel Horton. And he was going to be a big piece to this year. But then, as it would happen, just 3 days before the Pitt's season opener against the Citadel, Ithiel gets arrested. He gets accused of assaulting a police officer, gets charged with 4 criminal charges, and he's suspended by the university. And everyone's like, "Man, Ithiel, what are you doing, buddy? Like, what are you doing? Like, come on, man, you gotta do better than that." or you got to be able to stay out of a situation like that. Well, as I was saying, all the things that were going down on Thursday, those charges were dropped. Now, we understand that those charges were dropped according to what we've heard is that the judge was tired of the police officers not showing up to testify and bring all the evidence in their testimony even to the preliminary hearing. And that was the issue, was that initially this whole thing was supposed to be settled, or at least, the preliminary hearing held about a week after the incident happened. But then, the prosecution didn't have all of the police officers show who were involved. And so they pushed it back basically a month and a half to the end of December. And they didn't show again. And that led to the charges being dropped. Now, the charges can be reintroduced. That's one of the biggest questions right now. Will the Pittsburgh police bring them back? We'll see if that happens. But you think about this. In the situations, if Ithiel Horton truly struck a police officer the way they're saying, and they had the evidence and the body cam footage and all that, you feel like this would have been a done deal a long time ago. They would have said, "Oh, you know what? We're gonna put this through. This guy's gonna get punished because you don't touch police officers." And this would have been a foregone conclusion quite some time ago. But this has been very quiet. We haven't heard much about this. We haven't seen any footage. We haven't seen any information. And so with the charges being dropped, Ithiel Horton's back with the team. Now, I'm not here to say, what's actually going on there, because we don't know. I've been asking around where, we're not sure how this will eventually play out. But we do know this. I do know this through all this mayhem. And this may be mayhem outside of any Pitt player's control. Because again, if this was a situation where Ithiel really did nothing wrong, it's just another thing where all these kids on this team and Jeff Capel, they have been handed just poorly timed blow after poorly timed blow. When you talk about Nike Sabandy tearing his ACL, Ithiel's arrest, which if we're being led to believe that maybe it wasn't it was an unnecessary arrest and an unnecessary suspension. Maybe that's another reason why the two guys that were supposed to lead them from last year being out this year, being another factor outside of their control that put them in the hole that they've been in. But I say, for the same reason that I never called to fire Pat Narduzzi when Pitt football was struggling. It's the same reason I still won't call for Jeff Capel either. Now, Pat Narduzzi never fell nearly as far in record-wise as Jeff Capel has. But then again, he also didn't inherit what Jeff Capel inherited. And college basketball is also a different mountain to climb when it comes to the transfer portal and the culture that comes with the transfer portal, because of what basketball is. And it's a smaller sport when it comes to rosters and guys who can get involved and get their playing time. But despite the losing, despite the disappointment and some of the embarrassing losses to the Citadel and UMBC and Monmouth, you are seeing these guys fight really hard in some of these games. They have 3 one-point losses. 3 one-point losses. That is insane for a season, let alone the first couple months of the season, first month and a half of the season. And sure, they can get better about a lot of things, but this is a young team with a sophomore class that is the nucleus. John Hughley's the best player they got. Femi Udakale is coming around. Noah Collier's finding himself. William Jeffress is starting to be a little bit more aggressive, and you eventually want to see that take hold. But you're seeing this young core of guys figure out what is the line between winning and losing, and that's what we've seen in some of their games lately. is that they're seeing like, man, if we don't finish, with these 1-point losses, if we don't do everything in our power, and again, it can't be about letting someone else finish the job. I have to finish the job, whether I'm the forward that needs to box out and get rebounds after a free throw, whether I'm the outside shooter that needs to hit my shots or keep finding the work the open man, whether it's following through on a game plan like they needed to against Notre Dame, which is another 1-point loss that they had. But a perfect example, again, of following through and knowing all that it takes to win games in sports. People talk about winning like it's an easy thing. It takes a lot of effort and planning and following through. Like in that game, Pitt knew Notre Dame loved to shoot the three-pointer. Throughout most of the game, Pitt's defenders defended the perimeter. And they were keeping it. They were occupying the right spaces. They were keeping Notre Dame from getting the free looks outside, and they had Notre Dame where they wanted them. And then Notre Dame had some slashers that cut to the paint and got like a couple buckets. And then all of a sudden, that young, inexperienced Pitt team started leaving the perimeter open, and that's when Notre Dame started to hit those shots, and that led to them hitting 5 straight three-pointers late in the second half to lead the comeback. And then still, even with all that, it took a ridiculous, well-defended fadeaway shot over a defender whose finger was a fingertip away. If his fingernail was maybe an inch longer, Jamarius Burton probably nicks that ball and it doesn't go in. But even with all that, it still took that to lose the game for them. That's what I see from Pitt basketball right now. Is like, look, you knew this was the rebuild. You knew what this was going to be like. That this was going to be a rough year. But you didn't know that you were going to lose Ithiel Horton at the circumstances that he did. You didn't know that you were going to lose Nike Sabande the way you did. And now you have to wonder, are these guys learning what they need to learn so that they can understand when this team has a chance to be truly competitive in the ACC, which may still not come. It may not come next year or the year after. But as they're learning what it takes to play at this level, and remember, all these guys do have the COVID waiver available. So even though this sophomore class is technically sophomores, they can basically be freshmen if they wanted to. But you see that level of what they're becoming. This is the time, and I said this before. These are going to be the dog days of Pitt basketball. If you're a Pitt basketball fan, you want to cement your place in saying like, hey, I'm a true fan because I fight through all these. These are the games that you should be watching because you're seeing the maturation of John Hughley, who at the beginning of the season looked just ridiculously tired when he was put out there for more than 30 minutes at the end of the game, and he was huffing and puffing, and he couldn't focus enough to box guys out in the end. And now you're starting to see him be more focused in the end and help finish games. And granted, he didn't finish the Notre Dame game, but I don't put that on him. That was more so about just how some of the perimeter guys didn't defend at the right times, and how Pitt just doesn't have any true scores. But maybe Pitt will get a true scorer back in Ithiel Horton. Now, of course, their game against Virginia Tech for Saturday was postponed because of COVID. We'll see how that continues to impact the season. But they got Louisville this Wednesday on the road. I think it's a big opportunity for Pitt basketball to get some rest, get Ithiel back. He won't play all the time because Jeff likes to work guys back in like he did Jamarius Burton when he was coming off of his injury. And by the way, for those who are wondering about Ithiel Horton, I do have it on a good source that he has been working out on his own. He can't officially work with the players or the coaches of Pitt basketball or anyone that's affiliated with the program, but he can use the facilities. And from what I've heard, he has been putting in the work to stay in basketball shape. So it looks like we will be able to see him against Louisville on Wednesday, January 5th. And I'm telling you, a scoring presence on this team, especially an outside shooting one like Ithiel Horton, I think you add that to this team this year, they probably win all three of those one-score games because that's a significant boost to the outside shooting part where they've struggled mightily. They're the worst scoring offense in the ACC right now. For me, I want to see how Jeff Capel continues to build from it because he has these guys buying into winning ugly, to playing defense all through the end. Even after that loss to Notre Dame, when they, the offense wasn't great, they had some struggles, they had some droughts as they normally do. When we were talking to John Hughley afterwards, he wasn't talking about the offense. He wasn't talking about any efficiency or missing shots. He was saying we got to play better defense. When they were playing pretty good defense for most of that game. That tells me that these guys, at least they hear the message that Jeff Capel's saying, even through the losses. Because I'm telling you, when losing like this happens, it's very easy for young guys to check out, especially guys with the transfer portal prop. You know what? I'm out of here. I'm just not dealing with this. I'm going to just sleepwalk through the rest of the year, work on me, try to get me my points, and then go on to another program and see if I can get it right there. But I haven't seen that from these guys. I've seen them fighting. I've seen them clawing. I've seen them buying into what Jeff's teaching them. And for that reason, I do think Pitt needs to give him more time. Because if you're looking at how you want Pitt basketball to be, one, if you brought in an interim coach at this point, or even a coach at the end of the season to start the rebuild, you're going to lose the few young building blocks that you have right now and have to restart over again. And you're going to be right back in this spot next year. But there's a chance with this group. I'm not saying the record's going to be great this year, but if they can get to the end of the season playing more like a team and making less critical mistakes down the stretch, there's a chance you build off of that. You go into next season with a better understanding of who you are, maybe with a better score that you get through the transfer portal or you get through recruitment. We'll see how that goes. And the Panthers can be a different team next year. Like I said, all summer long, all spring and summer long, after this last season was over, I said this consistently. If you listen to the show, you know I did. To me, the measuring stick for Jeff Capel now is this class that he has right now with Hughley, with Jeffress, with Odekale, and with Collier. If by the time these guys are they're in their final year, this program hasn't shown signs of actual progress, I'll be like, all right, Jeff, you had your chance, and I know that you had everything up against you. You had. You inherited from Kevin Stallings. You inherited the COVID-19 situation was wild. You had the crazy situation. Justin Champagnie left for the NBA early. You had all these crazy injuries to start the season the year after those guys left, and then you had Ithiel Horton's situation happen. All those things have been rough to deal with, but I'm a firm believer when it comes to coaching to letting guys build culture because you see what it's done for Pitt football. If you had fired Pat Narduzzi 2 years ago or whenever you were tired of him being a Pitt football coach, they wouldn't have had this ACC championship run. Kenny Pickett wouldn't have been a Heisman Trophy candidate, at least for Pitt. He might have done it somewhere else. And it would have led to missing out on a whole bunch of great stuff. And I'm not saying that Jeff Capel's going to get Pitt to an ACC championship, but I'm saying you got to let coaches fight through these tough times. You got to let programs stay together and stay stable even through the fire, even through the tough times. Because when they do and they find their feet in those tough times, when times get good, they're that much stronger for it. We'll see if that can happen this year at Pitt basketball. Again, I'm Chris Carter of the H2P podcast here at DKPittsburghSports.com. We're bringing you all the coverage of all of Pitt's basketball's games down the stretch to show you, hey, where do these guys go this year? Can they be a competitive team in the ACC? Can they give some of these better ACC teams a run for their money in some of these big games? We'll find out in the coming weeks. Thanks again for listening to the H2P podcast. I'm Chris Carter. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also listen to this show along with all of our podcasts at DKPittsburghSports.com. on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, anywhere podcasts are hosted. They're all for free. They're all available. They're all fun. We have a lot of great shows that cover Pitt, Penn State, Steelers, Pirates, Penguins, all of Pittsburgh sports in general. It's a great network to be a part of. Check out all of our shows there. Thanks again for checking me out here. Again, Happy New Year, everyone. Stay tuned to DKPittsburghSports.com. We have a lot more great news on the website as well for you all to read. We'll be back in your ears with the H2P podcast next week.